Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I am pleased to welcome you to the 11th program in our series, Journey Through Time. With this program, we will conclude that series. It's been an exciting one, using the Chautauqua format to visit with people from past history. Also, I'd like to point out that with today's program, we'll end the 34th year of the North Idaho College Public Forum. And when we come to you next week, it will be a new year, the 35th year. I first of all welcome to the program a famous person from history, from France, Catherine de Medici, who was born in 1519 and she lived until 1589. She became Queen of England, was the wife of King Henry II, and she was Queen Regent of France through her sons' reigns, such as Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III. Welcome to our program and to our time in 2006.
It's a pleasure.
And secondly, I welcome to the program, also from past history, Joseph Pulitzer. He was born in 1847 and died in 1911. He was a very, very prominent American journalist, and we're here now in the 21st century, and we'd like to welcome you to our time to speak of your life.
Thank you very much.
And as always, I'm very pleased to welcome our regular panelist, Erna Reinhardt, who's Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College, and she will commence the question with our famous people from history.
Welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you here, and what a great honor. Both of you are very famous in your time, and it's a great honor to have you back with us today to talk about some of the things that happened during your lifetime. I want to start, first of all, with Mr. Pulitzer. If you could please share with our viewers a little bit about your life, share with us some of the highlights that occurred during your lifetime.
Okay. First of all, Ms. Reinhardt, you did get my name correctly. Mr. Stewart, I'm afraid you mispronounced my name.
You seem very sensitive about this issue.
Yeah, when you've been called Pew all your life incorrectly, it just doesn't go over too big. And you actually pronounce it Pulitzer. It's more dignified, yes.
So I don't think either one of us pronounced it correctly, actually, Ms. Reinhardt or myself.
She was closer, though.
Okay.
I at least didn't get upset with her. Actually, I'm thrilled about our modern technology here today for two reasons. Number one, I've been able to have an extreme makeover because one thing that I was a lot more sensitive about than my name was my looks. I felt that all my life I was very discriminated against because of my looks. I'm 6'3" when I was a strapling young adult, and I weighed 150 pounds. So I was rather thin and got teased a lot. I got teased because my chin was huge and my nose was huge, and my friends would say that they almost clacked together. Another thing that I am really grateful to with technology now is that they're able to have a delay system for sound on this show. Because as I have aged, I have had severe problems with Tourette's syndrome. And as a result, I will throw in a cuss word at very inopportune times. And I guess I've done it in a very unusual way in that I will put the cuss word between syllables of a regular word and not know that I've done it. But because of your delay system, your technology people are able to cut that out from what I say, so I appreciate it.
Great. Now share with us, you had a very prominent newspaper business. Share with us how that came about.
Well, I actually started with nothing as far as news goes. I was actually born to a very wealthy family in Austria, but I rebelled. And at age 17, I left my family, and I tried to join 4 different European armies by cheating about my age, but none of them would take me because I was so skinny. And finally, the U.S. Union Army actually came to Europe looking for recruits, and they were desperate enough to take me. So I spent 4 years with the Union Army and then ended up in St. Louis, Missouri. I was able to scrape together pennies that I could get, and I was a reporter for a German language newspaper. But by the time I was in my mid-20s, I bought the St. Louis newspaper, and by the time I was in my 30s, I owned many newspapers.
Excellent. We'll come back and we'll talk more about your newspaper business, Mr. Pulitzer. Thank you. Our next guest is Queen Catherine, and if you could please share with us what your life was like and give us some of the highlights that occurred during that time period.
Before I begin, I'd like to say to Mr. Stewart, Queen of France, not England.
I thought I said Queen of France.
You did not.
I apologize.
That is all right. It's very important to understand that. To begin with, I'll just give a few moments, because to overwhelm you with my life would take much longer than obviously is allowed here. I was orphaned in infancy, and I went from convent to be raised. My uncle was the Pope. I was Italian, born in Florence. And if I might make note, I know it is important to you, it is not important to me, but Niccolò Machiavelli actually dedicated his book Il Principe to my father, so that is something I know many will be able to relate with. I was actually married at 13 to Henri, who was the Duke of France, and then when his older brother, who was in line for the throne, died, and when my father-in-law died, we became the King and Queen of France. I was childless for 10 years, and then I had the first of my children when I was 24, and I had 10 children, 3 of whom died in infancy. From then on, I'm sure I don't need to expound too much. All know that I was from then on the Queen Regent of France for the next 30 years. And I brought about a peace to France. Oh, there was warfare, there was bloodshed, but I did bring about a peace for those 30 years, and Protestant or Catholic made no difference. To me, I was what you would call a religious tolerant. That was me. So there is just a little bit of my history.
Thank you.
Queen Catherine, you were very close to your father-in-law. It's my understanding when you married into the royal family in France. Would you share with us how that became very important? And later, of course, your husband would become king. But wasn't your father-in-law very instrumental in your being accepted? Because in France, some of your subjects were not very excited about you becoming a member of the royal family, that you were not French as to background.
Absolutely, that is true. When I came to France, I was an Italian woman, and they called me the Little Serpent, and they had many names for me, the Black-Hearted Witch, many. And I knew, you see, my husband, I was trying to avoid this point. It's not one I like to dwell on. He had a mistress for the entire 26 years of our marriage. And since I had no love from him, and since I was an orphan and fortunate to be married into this family, I had to gain the respect of my father-in-law, Francis, King of France. So what I did was I used my charm, my wit, and I would follow him everywhere. I was in his circle. I learned many, many things. I was wonderful at astronomy, mathematics, anything like that. I spoke several languages, loved Latin. I would go horseback riding with him, and yes, you are correct. This was what helped me secure, for he actually fought for me in his own way. Many suggested throwing me out when I could not have children for 10 years. That was all I was there for, to be married, to bear children. Of course, it was my duty. So when I could not do it for 10 years, many whispered into my husband's ear and said, "Get rid of her. throw her out, marry another. You have every right. And my father-in-law said, no, we love her. She's my daughter.
So it was very essential, that process. Upon his death, and your husband became king of France, and on his death, one of your sons and then another son. Take us somewhat through, you had a lot of tragedy as far as members of your family not living long, but yet you were able to serve in that capacity because of both your husband and then later your sons.
Yes. It was actually 1559 in July when we had just married our daughter Elizabeth off to Philip of Spain, and she was 13. And it was such a beautiful time. We had made a political move that was to secure us for so long. And in the celebration, my husband was jousting. He loved to joust. He was wonderful at it. And in the jousting, a lance went through his eye, and for 10 days he bled until he bled to death and
that
died.
was Henry II.
That is correct. My husband, yes. Henry II. Henri. And it was the only time we were ever almost completely alone, was on his deathbed. So after he died, our 10-year-old son, Francis, he became the next king, and he was too young, so I had to help him, to watch over him. And he died too, very young, died a couple of years later. And then Charles, you know him as Charles IX. He ascended the throne, and he was married to Mary, Queen of Scots. And that was very difficult for me. For yes, I was openly Catholic, but she manipulated him, and he loved her, and it was good for them to love one another. I did not have that with my husband, but she grasped hold of his mind, and many times it was a struggle for me, for he wanted to persecute the French Protestants more than I thought was politically wise at the time. So when Charles died, many years later, then my favorite, Henri, our youngest boy, he became king. And it was actually not very long ago that what happened was that Henri saw fit to rebel against me after all that I had done for him.
Henry III.
Yes, correct. Henri III. It is strange for me to hear the names attached. They are my children, so the only light in my life. But, however, Henri assassinated the leader of the Catholics in France underneath my bedroom when I was ill, shortly before I came here. So yes, there was tragedy. There was no stable love in my life. There was nothing from neither parents or husband, and even my own favorite child rebelled against me. And Elizabeth died too. She died very young in childbirth, barely 17, and her husband Philip of Spain was distraught. So she too died.
I would also like to ask our famous journalist, our panelists already talked about your papers, and you've talked about how you came to this country, but you became very powerful, and you had a lot of influence through your the media that you owned. Share with us two things. One is that you had some real, I guess, very competitive competition with another famous journalist. And so how did that come out? I believe it was with the Hearst family.
Right. I had bought the New York World and, of course, moved from Missouri to New York. And when I bought the World, it had a circulation of just 15,000. But within 3 years, my policies had grown that paper to a circulation of 200,000. And what I really banked on was appealing to the common man. I supported the common man, and I supported the unions rather than big business. The big businesses thought, haha, we can get him, we'll withdraw our advertising. But they found that they couldn't afford not to advertise.
Your circulation was so great they needed you.
Yeah, so they would come back.
Even though you criticized them a lot.
Well, yes, they usually were in favor of the Republicans, and I boosted the Democrats. And one thing wonderful is that when my newspaper was flourishing, the Democrats usually won the presidential elections. What made it successful also, especially in the war against William Randolph Hearst, was that we both really improved newspapers, with technology. At the time, the two-cylinder press came into being. So rather than a newspaper just printing like this, there were two rollers, and the paper would roll between them. And that made it much faster and much less expensive to produce newspapers. Plus, people at that time, public education came into being. So people wanted to read. And we decided that newsboys could make money, so we would sell them their papers, which normally cost a penny each. We would sell them 100 for 60 cents. And they were able to make 40 cents for every 100 they sold, which was very good back then.
So you really modernized the whole process. And I was supposed to, with this new printing technology, it was a more clear and visible and aesthetic paper.
Well, the problem, however, is that we spent so much on our competition that we had to buy cheaper paper, and the paper actually had a yellow tint to it because it was cheaper. Well, at the same time, we tried to outdo each other with larger headlines and make the news a little bit more sensational. And as a result, this news era became known as the era of yellow journalism. Of course, it was because of the color of the paper, not because of what was printed.
But even today, we can still use that term, and that's where it came from. If we have criticism, we can call it yellow journalism.
I suppose, but let's just have it be the color of the paper.
Okay. Are you aware of, in our time, there's some real sensational tabloids, and so they might get that label from, but you probably don't know too much about what that is.
Well, I prefer that be called tabloid journalism.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Erna Reinhardt.
Queen Catherine, share with us, sometimes public figures enjoy being in the limelight, and sometimes it's difficult for them. And I'm curious as to how you enjoyed that time in your life when you were such a public figure and also controversial in some ways. Was that a difficult time for you, or did you enjoy that?
But what did you mean controversial?
Well, as the Queen of France, I don't think everyone embraced you.
No, most hated me. But that was their
difficult?
choice. Perhaps you would call it pride, God forgive me, but I did not find it difficult. I had been without love for so long in my life that part of it is non-essential to me. What mattered was the monarchy, establishing, keeping, and after my husband's death, letting nothing get in the way. And so whether the everyday person loved me or not was of no interest to me. I was often called a cold mother as well, but I will take this opportunity to set that straight and say no, I was not. I think perhaps my affection for my children, who would become the future of France and Spain, and even part of England, came to them from me through letters in later years. But yes, many hated me. Many believed that I dealt with the occult. Believe that, yes. And they thought that I had magic, black magic, that I was openly against the church. And I just knew that the people, while a concern of me, were also there for me to use as whatever pawns to ensure the stability of the Valois monarchy for as long as it was possible.
Excellent. And Mr. Pulitzer, I'm curious to talk to you about what kind of qualities you looked for in a reporter when you hired your reporters. What were reporters like back then, and what was important to you when you went to hire a reporter?
I'd say attitude was the biggest thing that we were concerned with, because we could teach them their skills. But what we wanted was a news sense, so that they felt this is news, rather than worrying about how perfect everything was and how well written it was. We could fix that, and we did that. We hired one very enterprising young lady named Nellie Bly, and Nellie was real eager to expose problems in society. So at one point, she actually became a client of an insane asylum. And she lived there for 2 weeks pretending she was insane. And she exposed all the wrongdoings of this business in the state of New York. She later went on a world tour around the world in 176 days. So it was wonderful to have her be a pioneer for us as a woman in the news. We also instituted the first comic strip in newspapers. Because the newspaper was so yellow, he was called the Yellow Kid. And we instituted the first Super Sunday issue that had all the special Sunday sections. And that was very popular, and so obviously we were financially successful.
And many of those things we still have today. That's awesome. Share with us a little bit about the Pulitzer Prize and how that began.
Well, as I got older, again, my family had accumulated a lot of money, and we did several beneficial things to society with that. For example, we had a big program to get the Brooklyn Bridge built and this pedestal for the Statue of Liberty. We endowed the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the journalism school at Columbia University. But what lives today that we're the most famous for are the Pulitzer Prizes. And these financially rewarded the winners for their writing and photography, for their editing, not just in newspapers, but also for books and poems, that sort of thing.
Excellent.
Now that you've come to visit us very briefly in our time, while you're here, we've informed you of some of the things happening in the media, and we have something that's really competitive with the printed media, and that's television, radio first, and then television. They're both very active. From the time in which you lived, and as you're here visiting, there's a lot of discussion in our time that newspapers, once many of them have gone out of publication or they've been consolidated, and a rather well-known editor recently said that the time may come when newspapers will not be with us. What advice would you have to those newspapers in their competition with such things as television?
They have to rely on time elements in that they probably have to produce more than one issue a day, actually, in order to be more up to date. What they have that is going to keep them alive forever, I don't think they'll die, but they will hurt because of the electronic media. But what will keep them alive forever is that you can take it anywhere with you. You can put it in your briefcase, in your pocket. You can stand in the subway and hold on to a handrail and read it, so it's handy. Newspapers also find that they will need to specialize more. Each paper will have to have certain topics that it is known for doing a super job.
Or they cover things that, at least in their locality, that's not covered by the electronic media.
Correct, that too. And they will publicize different sides to controversies that the electronic media might not.
Thank you. Queen Catherine, you were influential in France for a very long time, and during the time of your father-in-law, your husband, and then your sons. As you look back on your, I guess we'd call it your reign, certainly as queen, what do you think was your greatest contribution to the people of France?
To the people?
Or to your country, your adopted country?
And yes, it was my country. That was the first great contribution, was I put Italy behind me and I embraced France, knowing I would never again set foot in Italy. So I gave myself to them. And I would say, from a mother's perspective, the 10 children that I gave France, 3 of whom would be kings, was a great contribution. If you want to know more, a light, I introduced all sorts of style. In fact, something called the high heel was something that I brought from Italy. I introduced that. I introduced style, music, Italian flavored food, music, reading, anything. But then for political, I would say keeping that monarchy, as I promised my husband on my deathbed. That was what I did for my country and my people.
That was you on his deathbed that you made
Yes.
that promise.
Yes, absolutely. And even when it did involve bloodshed, murder, from time to time it was necessary even to kill somewhat innocent people. But I did keep France from falling to pieces due to religious war and religious civil war and combat. I held it together.
On that note, we're just about out of time, and I'm going to have each of you to introduce yourself. We're going out of character now, and you certainly were remarkable in character. You stayed in character. Stephanie, would you introduce yourself and what you're majoring in? And she's one of our students. She's remarkable, and introduce yourself to our audience.
Okay, do you want me to look?
Just
Out
of character
out
now.
Of character,
Yeah.
okay. I'm Stephanie Ambrosetti, and I'm a student, and I graduate next month. And my major is actually anthropology. And I've been on campus now for about 4 years, on and off, working here and there, and so.
Well, when I asked you to do this role, I was so pleased that you agreed to do so.
Oh.
You've received great raving reviews about your performance at the college prior to this program, and thank you so much for doing that.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. So it was very, very enlightening.
It's a great experience.
It
isn't
was a wonderful experience.
And Niels?
Yeah, my name is Nils Rosedahl, and I'm the journalism instructor and advisor here at NIC.
And I have to add for Niels that your student newspaper has been remarkable. You've won many, many awards year after year. In fact, one of the famous ones that you won is the Robert Kennedy Award. I believe your paper's had that twice.
3 times,
Three
actually,
times.
yes.
Okay. Well, congratulations, and you really know a
Thank
lot
you.
about journalism. And you two are like a lot of other people that we've had perform. We've had over 200 people in history perform, and we thank you. And Niels, we thank your newspaper for its support. And you come out with a special edition after the week's performance. So thank you all very much, and good luck in what you do. Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we end the 11th week of this series. And next week when we come to you, it will be the 35th year, or the beginning of that, for the North Idaho College Public Forum. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.